11:47 p.m. in the freezing black of Russia's deepest winter night, minus 13 Fahrenheit blizzard screaming through Belgorod. The Luch thermal power plant is burning like a torch. Gas turbines exploding, transformers popping like fireworks, the whole city's power and heat grid collapsing in cascade failure. Just hours ago, Russia thought they had the upper hand. 200 Shahed drones and 25 Iskander missiles slamming into Ukraine's grid, thinking Belgorod was their untouchable backyard fortress. They were dead wrong. Ukraine just flipped the script and turned Russia's winter advantage into a roaring bonfire. The question is, how the hell did they pull this off right under Moscow's nose? 9:30 p.m. minus 13 Fahrenheit. From Bryansk and Kursk, 200 Shahed drones rose into the freezing sky, followed by 25 Iskander and Kh-101 missiles, streaking 300 miles south toward Ukraine's power grid. At Belgorod Air Defense HQ, the colonel watched the strike disappear over the horizon. Belgorod felt bulletproof 6 Panzers tracking hundreds S-400 overlapping. Numbers looked perfect. He missed one thing. Luch thermal power plant had to run heaters non-stop to keep turbines from freezing. In this deep cold, those turbines glowed like beacons on thermal satellites, bright steady, screaming their position. 15 miles south, a Ukrainian Luty drone hovered low. Thermal feed showed 2 huge heat blooms locked on the turbine hall's coordinates dead on. The commander stared at the screen. He knew he couldn't just walk through the front door. The Panzer crews were too sharp for that. If you want to rob a vault, you don't start by blowing the safe. You start by pulling the fire alarm on the other side of town. And that's exactly why, while the Russian colonel was busy patting himself on the back for a perfect defensive posture, a group of 40 Ukrainian CE drones was already hugging the tree lines heading straight for the launch sites in Bryansk. They weren't there to kill the missiles, they were there to poke the eye of the Russian radar. At 10:15 p.m., Ukraine finally unleashed its radiation hounds, 50 specialized SHATTERS drones, each one programmed to act like a suicide-seeking missile for anything that hummed with a radar signal. These things are hunting. They don't broadcast a single beep. They just listen for the S-400's massive radar pulse like a shark sensing blood in the water. Over at the Bryansk launch site, the Russian crew inside a Panzer S-1 command cabin didn't see a threat at first, they saw a ghost. Then their electronic warfare suite lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Radiation lock multiple inbound. The operator screamed, his hands blurring across the console. The night sky suddenly turned into a vertical river of tracers. Imagine 2 dual-barreled 2A38M 30mm cannons, each spitting out 2,500 rounds of high-explosive incendiary shells per minute. The barrels were glowing a dull cherry red in the minus 13-degree air steam hissing off them as they tried to chew through the Ukrainian swarm. The Ukrainian drones didn't make it easy. They were programmed with logic-driven jitters, mimicking the erratic flight of a panicked bird to confuse the Russian lead computing sites. One drone dived toward an S-400 radar van, its anti-radiation seeker locked tight. The Russian operator's sweat pouring down his face despite the freezing cabin slammed the manual override. He fired 2 57E6 missiles in rapid succession, the supersonic interceptors leaving twin trails of white smoke that lit up the forest like a stadium. One missile clipped a drone, turning it into a rain of carbon fiber. But the other 49 kept coming. The S-400 batteries joined the fray, their massive tubes belching fire as they tried to swat drones out of the sky at Mach 3. The Russian colonel back in Belgorod was watching the telemetry, his heart hammering against his ribs. To him, this looked like the big one. He saw 30 of those Ukrainian hounds get vaporized in the first 5 minutes. He saw his crews performing like heroes, emptying their magazines to protect those precious Iskander launchers. "They're desperate," he barked into his headset. "They're trying to stop our strike at the source move. Everything we've got to cover the northern launch sector. Now," and that, my friends, was the chess move Ukraine wanted. He fell for it hook, line, and sinker. To save his launchers in the north, he ordered 2 Panzer batteries to pack up and haul tail 25 miles away from Belgorod. He saw 30 destroyed drones and thought he was winning a war. But But as any old farmer knows, if you're busy watching the fox in the front yard, you're about to lose the chickens in the back. Ukraine had sacrificed 30 high-tech drones just to buy a blind spot. They'd found a solution. It was a loud and violent one, but it was only the opening act. And while Russia was busy reloading its cannons and cheering for its victory, the real storm was just starting to gather its breath. By 11:30 p.m., Russia had swatted down a swarm of radiation hounds. Their Iskander launchers were still barking fire, and they figured Ukraine was down to their last couple of chips. But here's the thing about General Frost. He's a fickle old man. Russia has spent centuries bragging about how the winter is their best soldier, but at negative 13 degrees, even the best soldiers start to get stiff joints. Over at the nearby military air bases, the Russian Air Force was trying to scramble Su-35s and MiG-31s to hunt down any remaining drones before they could even get close. But the blizzard had other plans. The runways weren't just snowy, they were sheets of black ice. De-icing crews were working frantically, but the chemicals were freezing on contact. Those multi-million-dollar jets, the supposed kings of the sky, were stuck on the ground like expensive paperweights. If you've ever tried to start an old tractor in a Dakota January, you know exactly how those Russian ground crews felt. And it wasn't just the planes. Back in Belgorod, the remaining Panzer systems were starting to feel the bite. Now, these machines are built for Russia, right? But physics doesn't care about your nationality. The hydraulic fluid in the turret servos was thickening into something resembling cold molasses. Instead of snapping to a target in milliseconds, the turrets were slewing with a heavy mechanical groan. Worse yet, the radar, the eyes of the system, was struggling. The radar pulses were bouncing off the millions of falling ice crystals, creating a chaotic snow on the operator's screens that made tracking a small plastic drone nearly impossible. The miss rate started climbing 15%, then 20%. That's when the second wave hit. And this wasn't a feint. This was a 90-drone swarm of FPV and loitering munitions screaming through the whiteout. The Russian crews went into a frenzy. The roar of the 30mm cannon started up again, but it was ragged. They were firing at shadows. About 50 or 60 of the drones were chewed up by the flak, exploding in midair and lighting up the blizzard like hellish orange lanterns. But 30 of them, they slipped through the slow spots in the Russian defense. The drones started slamming into the Luch thermal power plant. They weren't hitting the core yet, they were hitting the skin. They ripped through the corrugated steel roofing of the turbine hall. They shattered the glass in the control rooms. The Russian colonel in the bunker just scoffed. He thought it was just chaos. He thought it was a nuisance attack from a dying enemy. But what he didn't realize was that these drones weren't trying to blow the place up. Not yet. They were stripping away the armor. They were creating a clear path for the real hunters. Russia was leaning back confident that the nuisance was over, but Ukraine was just finishing the mapping phase. They'd used that swarm to find the exact glowing heart of the facility. And right now, while the Russian Panzer crews were busy sweating in their cabs, frantically trying to reload their empty missile canisters after chasing those plastic decoys, the real hunters finally arrived. Ukraine didn't just send more drones, they sent the FP-5 Flamingo. Now don't let the name fool you. A flamingo isn't some dainty bird. This is a 1,000-mile range cruise missile with the wing of a small Cessna and a brain powered by high-end AI. Behind them, just 30 miles from the border, a battery of HIMARS, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, leveled their tubes. Now normally a HIMARS wouldn't dare get that close to the Russian border, but remember that SEAD mission from earlier Ukraine had already poked the eyes out of the Russian counter-battery radar. The door was wide open, and the welcome mat was rolled out. Inside the Ukrainian control van, the atmosphere was so thick you could cut it with a knife. A young operator, knuckles white, as he gripped his station, saw the thermal ghost of the Luch turbine hall glowing on his screen. No more guessing, no more shadows. He whispered, "Good night, Belgorod," and keyed the ignition. The 10 flamingos screamed in from the west, hugging the snowy tree line at 500 miles per hour. They were communicating, adjusting their flight paths in real time to avoid whatever Russian radar was still spinning. The first flamingo impacted the reinforced concrete roof of the turbine hall, but it didn't just go boom. It used what the engineers call the Monroe effect. This is a shape-charged warhead that focuses all its energy into a tiny hypervelocity jet of molten metal. It's like a hot needle through a balloon. It punched a hole straight through 3 feet of concrete and steel like it was wet cardboard. Then the HIMARS rockets, the precision finishers, followed the leader. But don't go thinking the Russians just rolled over and played dead. These are professional crews. They couldn't use radar, so they switched to their thermal cameras, squinting through the blizzard. "Target acquired manual lead," the operator barked. The dual 30mm cannons roared back to life, spitting out a wall of fire. One of the flamingos, just a few hundred feet from the plant, got caught in a stream of high-explosive shells. Back at the S-400 site, they managed to get a desperate lock on the incoming HIMARS rockets. They ripple-fired 2 interceptors. One of the Ukrainian GMLRS rockets was intercepted mid-air. While the Russians were busy celebrating those 2 interceptions, they'd hit their saturation point. You can be the best goalie in the world, but you can't stop 10 pucks flying at you at once. While the Panzer was busy reloading for the 3rd time and the S-400 was realigning its radar, the remaining 8 flamingos and 3 HIMARS rockets took advantage of the split-second gap. They dived through the smoke of their fallen comrades. They dived straight through the holes the flamingos had just punched. The primary gas turbines were systematically shredded from the inside out. High-pressure gas lines ruptured, and the negative 13-degree air was suddenly replaced by a 2,000-degree inferno. The Russian colonel, back in his bunker, watched his entire status board go from operational to critical failure in exactly 45 seconds. His panzers were empty, his radar was screaming with mirror overload interference, and his multi-billion-dollar air defense wall had just been bypassed. With the turbine hall's roof already punched open by those flamingo missiles, the remaining drones swarmed those ghosts we talked about. They dove. It was a metal-on-metal feeding frenzy. They didn't need radar anymore. They just followed the 2,000-degree infrared glow of the ruptured gas lines. One drone slammed into a high-pressure manifold, and the result was a secondary explosion so massive it sent a shockwave through the blizzard that you could feel in your teeth 5 miles away. It started a domino effect. The fire from the main turbines raced down the lines to the Frunzenskaya Donitz transformers. Imagine a row of giant multi-million-dollar matches being lit one by one. Those transformers didn't just fail, they underwent a catastrophic energy release. Oil-cooled systems exploded, sending pillars of green and orange fire 200 feet into the freezing sky. Inside the Russian command bunker, it was pure, unadulterated chaos. The colonel was screaming into a mostly static radio, his face a shade of red that matched the emergency lights on his console. Shoot them down. His Panzer crews were desperate. They'd run out of those million-dollar missiles long ago. Now they were trying to use the 30mm cannons and even the side-mounted machine guns, firing blind into the swirling snow. Remember those frozen joints I told you about? At minus 13 degrees, the turrets were slewing like they were stuck in wet cement. The servos couldn't keep up with the nimble drones, and the radar was so choked with snow clutter and mirror overload interference that the operators were basically shooting at ghosts. Then the heart of the system, the 60-megawatt node of the Luch plant, finally gave up the ghost. It's what the engineers call a cascade failure. When that main hub went dark, the entire regional grid tried to pull power from the neighboring sectors to compensate. But it was too much too fast. It was like plugging 10 industrial heaters into a single house outlet. Substations miles away began to trip out to protect themselves. In a heartbeat, the winter advantage Russia was so proud of became its biggest liability. The rolling blackout swept across the region like a dark curtain being pulled shut. The lights were out, the turbines were scrap metal, and the coldest night of the year was just getting started. As the sun began to peek over the smoke from the Luch plant was a black scar across the white Russian snow, and the damage report was, well, it was what we call extensive. Let's break down the bill for this little winter outing. Those two 30-megawatt turbines were talking about high-precision machinery that was basically turned into expensive modern art by those Flamingo missiles. That's 60 megawatts of generation capacity deleted from the map. Because of that cascade failure, the regional power grid is now a mess of fried circuits and burnt-out substations. Fixing this isn't as simple as flipping a breaker. It's like trying to rebuild a Swiss watch after you've hit it with a sledgehammer. It will take Russia at least 3 days to fix it. So what's the lesson for today? Russia thought it could use General Frost to break Ukraine's spirit. But they forgot that Ukraine has some of the best engineers on the planet, and they know exactly how to use physics to turn a winter advantage into a thermal ghost hunt. Ukraine didn't just strike a plant. They systematically dismantled a hub and forced the bully to start worrying about his own toes freezing. It just goes to show never underestimate a technician with a drone and a grudge, especially when it's negative 13 degrees outside. But hey, that's just one night in a very long winter. What do you think? Is Russia gonna try to double down on the energy war, or will they realize that their own life support is a lot more fragile than they thought? Drop a comment below and let me know your take. And if you enjoyed this little trip into the frozen front, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and stick around. We've got plenty more stories to tell from the high-tech edge of this conflict. Until next time, stay warm out there. I'm out.